Let's make planting this year's garden a lot easier with the Planter app. This app is packed full of features. It has companion and combative planting, which are indicated by green and red circles. It has a simple drag and drop interface. It has 80 plus plants and thousands of varieties. All the info is needed to grow veggies, including when to start seeds, transplant, and harvest, the ability to create custom plants and varieties, a growing guide with in-depth articles to supplement the quick info in the app, not to mention that you can view it and use it both on your PC and on your mobile device, so you can always be planting your garden on the go. This app is used in my garden year-round to plan the upcoming seasons, reference the last year's seasons so I know when to rotate, and it also helps me to learn more about companion planting using the visual cues. When you create your garden, it's going to be based on the dimensions, and each block is going to be a square foot. I've had a lot of fun using this app, and the Planter app, which is spelled Planter, is available in your app store on both Google and Apple. So what are you waiting for? Get out there and plan your garden, and use the link below to get a discount on the Planter app.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds, and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, gardeners and homesteaders alike. I am Ben Gardner, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, Miss Batavia. And we are here to tease the brain today. Wouldn't you say this is a brain teaser?
Yeah, I like that description.
Yeah. You guys read the title. You know that we're really going to sit here and talk about it. That zones don't even matter. I know. Go ahead and shoot the messenger. You can give me all your hate mail. It's okay. But I guarantee you by the time we're done with this, you're going to be like, wait, my zone doesn't really matter. How much do you rely on them?
Well, I think it's, a title like Zones Don't Matter That Much probably isn't as catchy. Yeah. But that's firmly how I feel about it. I have this whole theory, which, it's going to be for our other topic podcast, the other podcast we haven't started yet, about how it feels good to belong. It feels good to be able to refer to yourself as a insert blank. And Gardner is, an opportunity to, belong to a crew, a clique, a group. And I think there's something about, like, there's a speak that that group has. And zones are kind of like this common, theme that a lot of us in the U.S. primarily kind of focus on. Like, I know what I'm talking about. I know what zone I'm in. Well, now I do.
Yeah.
We think it's going to tell us something about the way you're gardening versus the way that I'm gardening. And,
So here's the moment. You kind of brought it up, and I'm going to say it. We did one other episode all about zones, and we sat here and we're like, you need to know your zone. You need to know your zone. In which I do think you need to know your zone. For sure, because the zone tells you what your minimum winter temperature on average is. And so as expected, this number has been shifting throughout the years and is expected to continue to shift as far as if you feel to believe in climate change. Either way, you can't deny that it is definitely getting warmer, but sometimes we get cooler. So these zones will continue to shift. Now, it is important to know it, but I don't feel like, especially for a vegetable gardener, that it is something that we just need to live and die by. Because if we talk about what is a zone? The minimum temperature, right? Well, when you're growing a tomato plant, what's the minimum temperature?
More like 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. I mean, they'll make it through a lot cooler than that, but let's just call it even 32.
Nope, I'm not calling it 32, but I'll let you.
Yeah, you can let me call it, or let's just say frost. How's that? So if you think about it like that, like the zone doesn't matter at that point. And so this actually it's funny. This topic was born out of the Backyard Gardens community page on Facebook, Communities Garden. And somebody was coming in and asking questions about, they're in this zone and they wanted to know when to plant. And somebody else chimed in, like, the zone doesn't really matter. And it was like, they were exactly right. The zone didn't matter. So it's just interesting to see how that's kind of, how we live and die by it. But when you think about it and think outside the box, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've shortened it to say zone, we've shortened it to say garden zone, but it's hardiness zone. And so the place that it matters, I believe, is when you get to perennials.
Yes.
So there's some perennials that will survive in your zone, but not mine. Right. And it's based on, in your zone, you are on average getting down to whatever degrees Fahrenheit. And on mine, I'm getting down to, because I now know this, on average -5 degrees Fahrenheit. Did I get down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit at all this winter? No.
But it can happen.
Yeah, it's an average. History has said that, this could occur. And so I think that's important. I think that there's some like plants that are not technically perennials, but they will return, right? And so depending on what your zone is, you may find that, 2 states over, they're able to have a certain plant return every year. And then in my place, they're not. We may be in the same zone, we may not be. I think that, but like, I'd say much more than 90% of what we're talking about when we're asking questions about zones isn't related to perennials.
No. No. And I mean, I know that there's people listening right now that have been like, well, I've been growing this eggplant, pepper, tomato for 5 years straight in the garden. And that's because you don't get below that temperature. And which your zone is great. But, I know somebody out in, I believe it was Washington State, same zone as me, exact same zone, 8A to be exact. And their high temperature doesn't really meet 85 degrees very often, but they don't really get to freezing either during the winter. I mean, obviously we can get to freezing, and we definitely do, but it's not a repetitive thing over and over and over. And that changes the dynamic of what you can plant and grow in your garden.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's because it's a common question. And for a while, I really, 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 really thought it was really relevant. I would commonly say things like, I'm in zone 6A.
Yeah.
I'm in zone 6A. And then I'd also say things like, I'm in Chicago, which is probably more important to folks than, the zone, or at least should be. And then someone's always going to correct you on the internet. I get, I thought Chicago was zone 5. And it's like, well, yeah, some parts are, but all in all, if I'm looking at, it's a pretty big swag. So from 5A, you can get down to -20. 6A, where I'm at, 5A, you can get down to -15. 6A, you can get down to -5. The reality is you're below 0 as an average. You're probably done. Your tomato plants have been done. But I can get the idea of like that is a big gap. But again, for my annual vegetables, annual flowers, none of that makes a difference.
No.
I wish we could capture like the number of days and average kind of the low and high of temperatures between like, spring and fall for the U.S. Because that's the bit that matters. And I'm not even folding in humidity and all of that stuff. But I still am surprised that I'm able to do some of the things I'm able to do in Chicago, knowing that we get, I believe it's hot in Chicago during the summer, but it's not North Carolina hot. Like, that's the part that I think matters, right. How hot, how long,
Well, and I think, but see, you kind of started hitting the nail on the head a little bit, and it's not necessarily, how cold can you get? It's how hot can you get? What's your humidity level? How much precipitation do you get? How much sunlight you get? Now, I've had the pleasure of living in multiple latitudes within our country, and I can tell you when I lived in a higher latitude, it didn't get dark till almost 9:30, 9:45 at night. And it got light at like 5 in the morning. So you can start to see where here it gets dark at like 8:30 at night in the middle of summer. It'll get light probably about 6:15. So you're adding a couple hours of light on there. So what would something like that do?
It could fry some plants.
Well, it can fry some plants, but in these areas where it doesn't get very warm, it energizes them and they get a lot more growth out of them. It's just like leave it on your seed light for 16 hours a day. You know, you're getting more light, so they're able to grow faster at a more pleasant temperature than here. You know what I mean? Because I saw, like, when you go up into, like, I was shocked at some of the crops that they could grow in like Maine and stuff like that, like way up there. I mean, I'm talking about I would go up there and it would be Labor Day and we'd be kicking ice out of the dog bowl. You know what I mean? Like it was cold. But I mean, they could grow just about everything we can here. And a lot of times even better because they had all of that light. So I think, you know, there is a website somewhere, and I will find it throughout this podcast, where you actually go and you find out your zone, but what you actually find out is the amount of growing days that you have. And that's really important. If I can find, I've seen it 100 times, but I never take note of it until I actually need it. But that's really important too, because you really want to know how many growing days you have, especially when you're doing stuff like sweet potatoes or something where it's like 100 days plus.
It still varies though. So I've spoke of my growing days, and I've spoke of it in a way of between my average first frost and average last frost, which, by the way, I believe those are also more important than garden zones, right? But again, you know, and I know that I can grow on either side of those depending on the crop.
Yeah.
You know.
I feel like there should be like 2 zones, your cold hardiness zone and then your heat hardiness zone. I feel like that's something.
If I can get to 110, well, 110 is probably very, very abnormal. But if I can get 100, if I can get to 100 degrees in Chicago over the course of 4 or 5 days, that's still very different than a month of triple digit weather. You know.
And that's the same thing for the cold for me versus you.
Yeah, excellent.
Where it gets cold, it warms up, gets cold, it warms up, gets cold, it warms up. You know, those are the big difference. So
yeah, that for you, that allows you to grow many more things across many more months. But then there's also the crop confusion, the vegetable confusion based on those spikes back and forth.
Yeah.
You know. All right, you ready to wrap it up?
I mean, that's it. We're done, everybody. Everybody, you know now. But
Well,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. So I share my opinion on why I think zones became so prominent, you know, in social media and garden dialogue. I've never been in a garden center or a nursery where there's conversations about zones.
The only time I hear it is, again, with perennials and flowers. And I think it does absolutely matter when it comes to that. So I don't want there to be any confusion on how I feel about that. I think that if you're looking to put flowers in your yard of any kind, I think 100% zones definitely matter because, like for us, we have to put more tropical plants in our front yard because it gets so warm, but it doesn't get as cold in the wintertime. So then you get, you know, we get a little bit of reprieve on that aspect. But some of those plants won't survive, even though it's plenty warm at your house. They wouldn't make it through the winter. They would act like annuals.
Yeah, and that's there's also this bit, and I don't know a ton on it, so don't start quoting me. But there's a component of fruit trees, like why are orange is grown much more in Florida or California than in Chicago, right? You know, so there's a bit of the hardiness, but there's also how long it takes these fruits to ripen as well. You know, do I have enough days for that to come to fruition? Can a tree survive over a winter if it's not going to bear fruit until the second year, you know? So I think those things, I think you're stepping into a different level of gardening when you're talking about those kind of vegetables. Maybe not perennials. Perennials are a little bit more common. People buying them, not even realizing they're perennials. People planting them, not necessarily realizing it. So I think there is an opportunity to, you know, for some disappointment. And I can't even say with 100% certainty that, you know, if you're in your local area, you know, the thought is a perennial won't be sold if it can't survive there. Because some people do treat perennials as annuals. They like whatever the thing is so much where they just want to grow it for the short period, for the 1 year. I definitely think, though, the risk with disappointment increases because we're able to order so many things online.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, for us, it's like, well, hold on. Let me just say this. So the first hardiness zone was created in 1927, and it had 8 zones. And that's like one place that I see. It's like a nursery that has that listed. And then if you go to Wikipedia, it says that it was created in 1960. So I don't know. I think the more accurate one was probably created in 1960. And then the zones changed in 1990. In 2012, they were updated. So it's like you almost need, and so if you ask me, it sounds like we're due for another change or another reevaluation of what zone you're in. So,
well, I told you that my my frost and first frost and last frost dates have shifted by a couple of days.
Right. Mine too. Yeah, mine's shifted by a week. So there is that. And I mean, and that's the thing too, is you're in zone 6A, I'm in zone 8A, and our frost dates are very similar.
Yeah.
We're like a week or two off on either one. So, that doesn't really matter though, because when you look at it that way in the grand scheme of things, like your last frost date is what?
November the 1st.
No, your first frost date. Sorry.
I always get them mixed up no matter what. It's probably because I'm always so concerned about the frost coming. April the 17th.
So you're April the 17th. I believe now technically, I do need to say this. When you look up your frost date, there are multiple dates based on percentages of chances. So I'm going to split the difference and say April 2nd. Now, here we are right now. We're recording this and it's April 5th and it's 85 degrees outside and the low is 65. On April, let's say April 18th, which would be 3 days after yours, if I did my math right. I may not have, but anyways, what's your low temperature going to be?
In April the what?
Like 3 days after your last frost date.
Oh, it could still be, in the 30s for sure.
Right. And see, there's the difference right there as well. That's a huge difference. So we're talking multiple things that are just changing the dynamic of this conversation completely. And it's frustrating because you hear people and they're like, well, I don't know why this won't grow because I'm in zone 8 or I'm in zone 7. And it's like, well, hold on now. Let's slow down, Turbo. There's a difference, I think I saw with mine, I'm still going to continuously look for the website, but I think mine, I had 264 active growing days for me. So that makes, when I think about that I can now apply that to what I'm growing. And I feel like if you're going to ask somebody a question, you should be like, hey, been here 265 days. Question. You know what I mean? Because then you can really put it together when it comes to vegetables. Like, what can this person grow and what can they not? Imagine somebody with 90 days. You're eliminating all potatoes, melons, okras, all these things right off the bat in that first initial sentence.
And it's not a light switch. It's not, I get to my average last frost date. That's why you asked me, like, what's going to be the temperature 3 days later. Like, I could still average, first off, I could still get a frost, but it's not like we go from, all right, there's no more 32 degree days. Now we're in the 60s. That's just not how it works, right?
Right.
Not for me, right? So it's much more of a slow pull with a couple of spikes here or there. Like yesterday, I was telling my girlfriends, I woke up and I was like, damn it, I left the stove on. Like I was cooking, earlier in the evening, and it was so hot that I'm like, because I do that sometimes. I know it's not safe, but sometimes I'll leave it on accidentally. And I'm like, God gosh, and I'm like, I'm so tired. I don't want to get up. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get up and turn it off. And so I walked into the kitchen and the stove wasn't on. I looked to see if the burners were on. Like it was so hot. It was 71 degrees overnight.
That's crazy.
On April the 4th. And we are expected to get down to 35 degrees as a low tomorrow. Where's
so that's how much you're swinging right now?
Yeah, the 70 is definitely an outlier. The rest of the temps for the week are going to be at a high like in the 50s, teetering around 60. But today it was 70 again. Woke up and realized, oh, the house is on fire because it's much warmer outside. We may get another 70-degree day in another week. Like, that's the hard part, but our nights are still so cold. I was talking to my uncle about it, and when I was in the garden last weekend, I like to garden, without gloves. And I was like, this soil is so cold, like cold to the touch. Like, you really don't want to work in it too long because it's that kind of cold.
Yeah.
And that bed had been covered with plastic for months. So that's going to be the warmest part of my garden, but it's still super duper duper cold. It doesn't matter that I've had a couple of 65-degree days. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but all of these are temperatures that I like to keep track of.
Well, and if you think about it too, like in my state in particular, I live on the coast, and so we're in zone 8A. You go out towards the mountains, they're in zone like 7 or 6 or something like that. And you think that it would be totally different, but in all reality, other than that low temperature, it's not. They can have, out in the mountains and stuff, wild temperature swings. I've been out there and it'd be 85 degrees in the day, and then the next morning it'll be snowing. So there's all these different variables that can go into it as well. And it makes it, I just feel like it makes it overly complicated, and it's an antiquated method of determining what to grow. And I think as gardeners, we've latched onto it in a way that's unhealthy, and it can be very deceiving. Yeah. There's like a whole bunch of negative things said at once. I apologize.
Well, so now where's the harm? Where's the true harm? So someone that's like, oh, I'm looking at, you've been in zone 8A, and I'm also in 8A, but again, I'm maybe in Washington State, and I try to grow the thing that you grow. Like, if I'm successful, it doesn't really matter, right? If I'm looking at you and saying, well, he's only a couple of zones ahead of me, I could probably still grow it. Like, I do believe that there is a little bit of heartbreak. Not only that's actually possible, but that's occurred. But generally speaking, I think that, most times it's probably no harm, no foul. Of course, we're, maybe not as informed as sometimes we think we are, but...
Yeah, I think it's a limiting factor when it comes to educating yourself about what you can grow and when you should grow it. It's like, take your peppers, for example. Start your seeds 8 weeks before you plant them outside. Okay, that's average what they say. Now, before your last frost date, it's exactly what they say. Now, if you think that, then if you plant 8 weeks before your last frost date, are you going to be able to put them out right after your frost date? You're going to be 12, 16 weeks after that before that pepper can go in the ground. Now look at me on the other hand. I planted mine. Well, based on my experience, I started them 16 weeks ahead of time, but it's not even my last frost date, or it's just hit it and I'm about to put my peppers in the ground. You know what I mean? And so I feel like it's a limiting factor. And then when it's all said and done, when it comes down to the amount of harvest, because let's be straight, this is why we garden, is to harvest. That's the whole point. You're delaying the amount of harvest you can get off of that. You know what I mean? Like, you're not maximizing your garden's potential.
Yeah, I did a lot of preserving of peppers. And peppers it's a real important, peppers and sweet potatoes are, and if I was really growing onions like I had planned to, probably onions, that's really the kicker, because they're such long crops. I'm sure there are a bunch of others, but if I'm not growing them, they don't come top of mind. The time frame, like your window, right? And so I've been thinking about peppers. I preserved a lot last year. I really enjoy them. They do well in my garden. Right? By well, I mean, they are typically not sick. They produce as much as I'm expecting. Right now that I get the idea of like a bell pepper plant isn't going to generally produce in my area 20 peppers. You're going to get a flush of them. But then I say, like, I'm harvesting peppers. I could harvest green peppers much earlier, but I like to let my peppers get to like their mature state. September is when things are starting to rock and roll for them.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced that if I would have planted them instead of May 25th, May 5th, if I would get them that much earlier. I don't think it's just now you get them 3 weeks earlier. I think my May temperatures are still so iffy when it comes to how long it's hot for that, I question whether or not I would gain much. I say that to say, peppers I'm still questioning how many peppers I want to plant in the years to come.
Right.
Because of how much time they take to get to the place that I want to harvest them. They're a smaller footprint. I'm a little bit off topic, but if I had a longer growing season, if my average first frost date was further into the year, later in the year, then perhaps I would say for kind of peppers, I have like 8 months to grow them versus the 4 that I really have. Maybe I would feel different about it. And I think you can kind of take that approach across a couple of different vegetables. Eggplant is another example of that, well, how long is it going to take to produce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I found the website.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited about it.
I know. I found the website. It is, and it's stupid. It's thealmanac.com/gardening/frost dates. And so just put in like frost dates for, by zip code and you'll come up with it. So for instance, mine says says the nearest climate station near you. So it may not be your actual like town that you live in, but closest to you. It says the altitude, which for me, it doesn't really matter. Last frost date, first frost date, and then growing season. So I have 218 days of an active growing season, which means no temperatures under 32 degrees. And it says the last and first frost dates are a 30% probability. So there's a 30% chance that you can get them, get a frost. Now my frost date is April 1st and November 6th. Miss Batavia's.
They stole this idea. They stole this logic from me. This is the way that I've calculated it.
So, and here we go. So you're in zone 6A. We know that. Your last frost date is April 17th, November 1st, and your growing season is 197 days.
Yep.
So I only have 21 more days of technical growing, but because of the way my temperatures are more, I'm trying to think of the correct word, more regulated in the winter, I actually can grow year round for certain crops. That doesn't mean that I can go out there and just do whatever the hell I want. I've got to time things out just right. But yeah, we can grow. And I've proven that year after year that I can grow food year round. And with a little bit of protection, I can even take another step further and basically grow any winter crop I want in the middle of winter. Just off that. And we're 3 zones away from each other.
So I want you to take the other look at that. Without protection, look at what you're able to grow.
Yeah.
And I'm sure someone that lives in Chicago, you're probably 8 streets over, that you have something that you're actively growing that's just in the middle of snow in the winter. I've not had that experience. Right? Like anything that I have, if it's out in the open, at some point, the top will be dead. The root may still survive, but the top will be dead. I'm not going out to harvest leaves of something, on January 20th, because it's been 10 degrees for 10 days, and so that's a huge difference. I had someone comment, and it was, unfortunately, I'm a little bit late to get back to it, but the comment was like, "Oh, I'd like to grow. Tell me how I can grow this during how can I grow and fertilize this during the winter?" And I'm, in my mind, when I write the response back, which I do all the time, but sometimes I don't type it out, like, what's your winter like? Like where are you isn't even enough anymore. You can narrow some things down. Like this person says California. There's some clearly we saw all that snow in California. I can't think of where exactly that was a couple of months ago. So we know even California isn't descriptive enough. But if they were to tell me Chicago, then I got the answer for you. If you were to tell me Michigan, I got the answer for you. If you tell me Indiana, I got the answer for you. Like, you can't, like not out in the open, at least. I think those things, it's nuance, but that's the critical piece. What you're doing, where you are, and how long you're trying to do it for. Get that, Leonard? Put it on a t-shirt.
Leonard got all of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know zip codes and stuff, so I can't really be looking stuff up. But I know, like, from northern to southern California is like totally different. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a totally different climate. It's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's such a big state too. I think that I, on the positive side, never see much controversy. Like, when I look at people's posts and comments and things around zones, like there's never outrage. Like, you told me you were in this zone and I tried to grow this, like there are not a lot of fights around it, other than people, again, correcting you and saying, not only have people said, I thought Chicago was in zone 5, people have literally said, no, Chicago is zone 5.
Yeah.
Which I think, again, it's obnoxious, absolutely. But a lot of what we see on the internet is. And earlier on, it mattered to me because I felt like, well, maybe, am I misinforming people? If I'm just saying I'm in Chicago and now they're thinking, oh, that's zone 5 and I can do what she's doing. And I don't think we can take ownership for that. I think we can do things like this, have this conversation about, it doesn't really matter.
It's interesting too. I just put in Houston, Texas on this date thing. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even say anything about zones on it whatsoever. Isn't that fascinating? Like, it may not be interesting to you guys, but to me, it's like really interesting because it's like, I was curious because I'm looking it up, and I'm like, well, what is Houston's climate or the, gardening zone? Figuring I can get it all here, and you can't. So it doesn't even, I think that's the only place that I've seen where it just like clearly doesn't matter at all.
It's uncommon that,
right.
It's an event once they get down to freezing. We saw it. I don't know if it was in Houston in particular, but we saw it a couple of years ago. When people had pipes, bursting in their kitchen. Yeah. It's a whole ordeal. But that's an area that, it's almost never a worry for them. I think there are a few other pockets where, you see things. I see videos now where people are still referring back to the big freeze, last year. I know that impacted you a bit as well in 2022, later part of 2022. Like, zones didn't save you. What, are you laughing at me? Because I was making fun of, the big freeze.
Just because I remember a month ago, we're like, I'm so tired of hearing about the big freeze. But it's like, for us, it was like huge deal. Yeah. Especially when it came. That was the thing, is when it came.
But that's the classic, like, you think that's cold? That's the kind of, making fun of folks like, you guys are staying home because you got an inch of snow, and just not recognizing it. And those towns aren't built for that. I heard
hold on, Inch? No, Trace. They shut schools down here.
Yeah, I was one of my favorite pair of boots, which have kind of turned into my early spring, late winter garden boots. They have absolutely no tread on them. And I'll go out, walk into my car to the garage, and there's a spot that's always slick on my deck, and I'm like, oh, and so it's the reminder of like, oh, you think this weather is turned to your favor, but guess what? If you get out there early morning, I have a video clip of that on my phone. Yeah.
I have a video clip.
Yeah. No, I should have fully expected. Those are the boots, though. Those are absolutely the boots. And that's probably 60% of why you have that video. Because the other 40% was, I was going to end up on my butt either way.
I want to just say the part about the clip that I love the best. This is a clip that Batavia sent me, and it is locked in a vault. I cannot divulge it to you guys. I'm sorry. Where she slipped in the snow and fell. It was the amount of time she sat there in the snow just thinking like, damn it. That was the funny part. It wasn't even the falling, because I felt bad for you, but the fact that you're just like, I can't believe this. I don't know what to do,
So we're going to connect this. We're going to make this garden related because some people just don't know like this life. So I'm still pissy about it because I had to return my air fryer stopped working. And I had the hardest time through Best Buy trying to get it returned. They're like, you got to bring it into the store. And I'm like, we don't do that anymore for returns. And so I was mad about that. And it was like maybe my second trip, but I had all kinds of like garbage I was trying to take out. So I was risking a lot, on this trip. So I'm walking and I get down to the bottom and I can see there's ice, but when you've lived this life, you think you know how to manage it. And so the slip comes. And I promise you, I look back. The only reason why you have the video is I had to look back to see, like, did I butt my head? Because I felt like I lost time. So it was like, I knew I was stepping, and then the next thing I know, I was looking around like, what happened? But then I had to figure out, like, it's kind of like quicksand or something. Like, how do I get up without falling a second time? So that was the staring around, like, I'm going to have to wait until spring to get up.
Yeah, I'm just going to sit out here and wait it out. So do you think that gardening zones matter? Do you think that people should know their gardening zones?
I think that generally speaking, it's a piece of information you tuck away. I think that generally speaking, they matter, but they're not as important as most people think. And I'm going to speak on what I believe most people think.
I respect that. I have no problem with that at all. Do you think that people need to know their amount of growing days?
Are you going to ask me about all of these, and then are you going to ask me to rank them?
I'm going to go all the way through.
Yes, I think it's probably more important than garden zones.
And I mean, do you need to know your first and last frost date?
I think that's probably one of the most important.
Yeah, I do too.
If you get down to frost, obviously.
No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it a step further and see. I want everybody to realize, like, I sell a lot of plants and I talk to a lot of people. And it's funny, like, we went to a farmer's market last week, and I hope this person's listening. I really do. And he's walking around and he's like looking at the plants and he's like, I'm like, you guys interested in some peppers or something? You got any questions? And he's like, man, I've had my garden planted for like 3 months. And I'm like, oh, really? And I know where he lives. I know the climate. I know what the weather has been. And I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I've been having some problems, though. I'm like, shocker. And I was like, what, did it get warm one day and then you went out and planted? He's like, yeah. And I was like, you can't do that, man. But he proceeded to pick an argument with me about it. And the moral of the story, which I kind of left it at this, is like, you need to know what your climate is like across the board for, so you can make the educated decisions about what to do, and I see this all the time. And I've talked about it on the YouTube channel a lot. Is like, I've been fighting the urge for about a month now to plant my garden, to just go out there and throw my tomatoes in. And it was like a week later, frost, and then it'd be like 85, 60 at night, and then a week later, frost. And so, like, now that I've hit my frost date, now I can make an educated decision and look out. So typically there's a rule in my area where we don't plant tomatoes or peppers or anything real sensitive until after Easter, because invariably it always happens. And this year is going to be that odd year. So, we're going around to farmers markets right now selling plants, and we're two weeks ahead of schedule. You know what I mean? And you can't time that out. You don't know. But what I do know is in the past, this is what to look out for. And so I can make an educated decision, and I can change plans if needed when it's time. You know what I mean? And I think that's important for people to know, is don't just live day to day. Like, spend 30 minutes and just look up the history of your area and think about, and I know there's a lot of people now that are moving around and going to completely new areas. We have a lot of people from up north coming down here. And the one thing that I hear a lot is I can't get anything to grow. I can't grow any, like people from like New York and stuff like that. And it's like, because it hits a wall in the summertime and they don't know how to handle that wall. Not to mention that they're planting like determinate tomatoes, trying to figure out why their tomatoes aren't growing. And simply it's because you can plant 2 rounds of determinate tomatoes here, and outgrow them each time. You know what I mean? So there's a big difference. So it's interesting to see those and, hear from these people. And I get a good snapshot, like in my area, of what's going on and what's going on in people's minds when they're trying to plant their gardens. And every year I hear about people pushing the envelope and ultimately getting burned every single year, because we always get a warm spell in about the middle of February every year. And it's just like when I was up in New England, I lived there for 10 years. Every January, there was like a 2-week period where it'd be like in the 60s. And me being from the South, I would be like, oh, here we go. Spring's on the way. And then the bottom would just fall out every single time. And it wasn't even close for me planting. It'd still get the freezing at night, but not like that bone-chilling cold. You know what I mean? It's like a reprieve. They called it the January thaw. And so I learned from the locals that had lived there their whole lives, like, yep, every year this is what happens. And so I knew moving forward, and that's one reason why I left, because I just couldn't take the tease of it. So I think that's a very important measure to know. And that goes in knowing your first and last frost dates.
I believe, while we didn't capture it, what that weather is during those growing days, what that weather is like, so whatever that first month is, second month is, third month is, what should you be expecting?
Right.
And again, more so from a how high versus how low, so for me, clearly within that 197 days, May is within that period. What do I typically see for May? That's going to help determine if I'm going to be like the guy at the farmer's market or not. What is my September, October? Have feelings around kind of what those months look like. September is pretty even keel, but October is any person's guess, and then even going into November, right? So my average first frost is November the 1st. It could come. You've seen it. You've seen me tracking it. It could come on that date, a day before, a day after. I wish it was like just get over that hump and then you're in the clear. But no, you're going to get it a few different times in November.
Right.
And that's going to impact what I do. I'm not going to get down to -5 degrees.
No.
But which goes back to the garden zone and how even in November, it really doesn't matter that much. But I'm going to get below freezing.
Well, and one thing to know too is like if you go and you were to take the advice of the Backyard Gardens podcast, which hopefully you will, and you look at your average temperatures for your area, dude, they're always lower than they're supposed to be. So it's like right now I'm looking at it. In April, the average temperature here is supposed to be in the mid 60s. It's been 85 every single day in April. You know what I mean? And like I go through each month and I'm like, it's, average high 86 degrees. And I'm like, dude, it's regularly over 90 degrees here. So there is that. And it's like in my area too, we have microclimates. Do you know what a microclimate is? Do you know what affects it and stuff like that?
No. I mean, I think I know what a microclimate is. I don't know what impacts it.
So like in our area, for example, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, we have 2 cities north and south of us. And they would get rain like every day in June. And we had, where I live in the middle, we live in the country, we had a drought. We didn't get any rain. And what it was those, all the roads and stuff were creating those microclimates and creating the radiation, the heat radiating off of the roads and causing rain, which can affect temperatures as well. So a lot of times in big cities, it'll actually be warmer than on the outskirts of the city because of all this. So, if you live in a city or something like that, these all can make changes within your area. Just like if you live in the mountains or in the hills or something, if you live in a valley, you can get the dew settling. You'll get, I believe it's more frost or less frost, one of the two. No, you'd get less frost because you wouldn't get the wind, more frost because you wouldn't get the wind blowing it away. And so it'll have time to settle and frost. So your frost date may technically be a little bit earlier if you're in a valley than if you're on a hilltop. So these are all things to kind of consider. And I know it seems kind of complicated, but I mean, we're all watching Netflix, watching junk anyways. Let's turn that off for just a minute and just think about this stuff. And I think it'll make people's gardens improve a lot more because they'll really be in tune with what's going on in their yards and their area. You know what I mean?
So do you think that the new gardener needs to kind of indoctrinate themselves into all of these details, all of these bits?
I think it's an overtime situation. You know what I mean? I don't think you need to be like, all right, I'm going to start my first garden. Let me start researching, and just go down the rabbit hole. But I think, over time, we talked about that in the Gardens Evolve episode, where like you start and you grow like a tomato. And then you progress and you progress, and then you're just starting to test out cooler temperatures, and you want to start growing as long as possible. And I think within time, if you focus on that, within a couple of years, you'll start to wrap your head around it a little bit better. For instance, where I am right now, it's cooler here because we have the wind coming off of the ocean. So we have those cool temperatures washing in, where if you go 10 miles inland, it'll be 5-10 degrees warmer sometimes. You know what I mean? Especially in the evenings and stuff like that. So just knowing something real simple like that. And anybody who lives on the coast knows that you get, the afternoon breezes and stuff like that. Or if you live on the Great Lakes or a pond or anything, you'll get like an afternoon blow. Then that kind of happens. So I think it's just knowing these things and learning about them slowly. You can wrap your head around it a lot better. I definitely don't think you should just dive into it right away, because it does get really complicated.
Yeah, it's like, you don't take trigonometry before you complete your algebra courses, right?
No.
And that's not to say that what we're talking about is as complicated on scale, but I think that even the desire to want to know these things comes for different people at different times. But, if you have a single tomato plant, you probably aren't interested in all of these details, and you probably don't need to know all of these details.
No.
If you try to plant a tomato plant in Chicago and in January, you'll quickly find out. I think intuitively people get it. I think that the warmer places, you think that there's a little bit more play. I think, actually the opposite. I think that what I clearly learned, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, was how much we could do in places like Chicago and places like Zone 6A, outside of those growing zone, or what is it, growing days even, right? I think that's probably the aha moment, and that's, kind of despite the zones,
Yeah, and I mean, it comes down, like you have to manage cold, I have to manage heat, and you can do that multiple ways, and sometimes it's just by varieties, and just knowing that too, and I feel like, I've tried to make a shift in some of my viewing pleasures about gardening on different social medias and really focus on people in climates that are a lot like mine. And that's really helped me a lot to understand, because I'm starting to see, like, I've watched videos about managing cold because I was worried about it. Dude, you know how many times I used my low tunnel this year? Once. I'm not even going to put it up next year. I'm just going to get it ready to use. I'm not even going to pull the plastic out and stuff because it's just not necessary. But in the summer, we may need to reevaluate that and say, like, we may need to put shade cloths down or something like that, extra watering and stuff like that. So it makes a big, big difference. And that's where, like, the garden zone just doesn't matter in that, or the plant hardiness zone just doesn't matter anymore.
I think, gosh, I wish I'd have thought about this 40 minutes ago. I think extending your season, I think garden zones absolutely matter. Right. So my great desire to grow all throughout winter, right, with protection, I clearly understand that. It's still how much protection are you providing, and so, like, could my garden sustain -5 becomes the question. Is it worth me investing in creating structures and such to have a garden all throughout the season? What would I need to do to survive -5 degrees? That's when things matter, but that's probably an extreme version of gardening, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, you have to really
with annuals too, just to note. I'm talking about annuals in that scenario.
And you have to consider too, is like, how much are you producing out of your garden to even make it worth your while? Yeah. Like at some point, like, I mean, okay, so, Batavia has 852.5 garden beds in her yard. if she's going to plant, you know, 1 4x8 bed over winter, like what's that going to do other than make you feel good? Now, you may want to do that just for fun, but when it comes down to it, that could be a lot of effort that's just not needed.
It makes me so sad. And I had a call for work earlier this morning, and this is a treat for you all because I don't think I've shared this with you all. There was a second round of New Year New Batavia, and it came about around spring. And so my colleagues would oftentimes get greeted with good morning, right? And so just an overall happier version of me. And that's not what they got this morning. we are, I mean, the weather again is much more mild, much more comfortable, but it was doing quite a bit of raining. And so I was kind of like, oh, we're so close. Spring, please deliver. And I was sharing with a gardener kind of connected to this. It's really been hard for me to get out of the gate, getting out of the starting block, you know, kind of this bouncing back and forth with the weather, you know. And so it's almost a pipe dream now, this idea of I can create these structures and I'll have plants that are alive under the 6 layers of plastic. And I'm looking and saying, like, do I even want to go outside to go get, you know, whatever the harvest, whatever that is? I don't know if I really have it in me right now, you know, not right now as in this moment, but just generally speaking, like just look at how difficult it's been for me to get out and into the garden. We haven't had snow much of this winter. It's not even that. That's not even, you know, a barrier that I need to climb over. It's just like, call me when it's 75 degrees consistently.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, too, is how much are you willing to deal with when it comes to extending and stuff like that? And it's like, you know, why are you guys talking about extending your season in April? And it's because, I mean, sometimes it takes you the whole summer to get ready to do that. You know, I mean, it is what it is. You know, you might need to be doing some research and figuring it out.
Well, there's also this bit of, you know, weird, by the time this airs, you're like, you know, a third of the way through spring everywhere in the U.S., right? And so, again, spring temperatures vary based on where you are. But windows are closing when it comes to spring planting, right? You know, and for some, it's already closed. And so now maybe you're starting to think about, well, I didn't get a chance to grow this in spring. You know, now you're thinking about fall, right? And all of what we've talked about, growing days matter. I mean, this is where it really starts to get complex. When do you plant the thing that you're trying to plant for fall? How much, you know, into the fall season / winter season can that thing go? You know, if I have something that's almost ready to harvest in the fall, if I add something to extend the season a little bit more, maybe it gets to the point of maturity. I'm still not even convinced that that's a thing, but it all starts to be intertwined. But again, it's more like calculus at that stage.
It gets to be a headache. It definitely does. So I'm going to stand firm in the fact that I don't think garden zones really matter. And I think that we should be discussing, you know, average temperatures and times of temperatures, which makes it a lot more difficult to open a conversation with somebody when you have to say all those things like, hi, my name's Ben, 218 days, April 1st and November 3rd, with the average of 75 and April 2nd. You know, I think that's a ridiculous way to communicate, but...
Put on a shirt, Leonard.
Yeah. It would be nothing but just words and numbers. It'd be, you know, mind-boggling. But, you know, one thing I will say is if you ever want to know anything about the climate in your area, there's 3 types of people to talk to. Farmers, hunters, and fishermen. They will all be able to tell you all those times because they're in tune with it. And you may not want to call yourself a farmer. You may want to be a gardener. You may not want to be a homesteader. You may want to be, it doesn't matter. We're all farmers to an extent, just on a smaller scale. And so I think that we should be more in tune with what's going on in our surroundings and not worry so much about the here and now, but worry about like throughout the course of the season.
I am very proud of all of the things I've learned in the second half of my gardening career, you know, and what I learned the first, you know, 7 or 8 years has prepared me for now what I'm able to absorb and understand in the second half of the time I've been gardening. And I am generally, I think I'm just a better gardener for it, but I'm also a bit more compassionate.
Yeah.
A bit more empathetic, you know. So I'm not really laughing at you all with the big freeze. I'm smirking, but I'm not laughing. But yeah, they're all good things. So if you basically want to say, I'm going to opt out of gardening zones, do that. And you don't even have to do all the other stuff we said is more important. I mean, we recommend it, but
do what you want. Yeah. It's your garden. You know, plant your tomato plants in July and, you know, whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. Mm-hmm. That's your garden. It's your life. You do what you want to do. And I think that's the important part, too. I mean, just because I get super technical about it, and that doesn't mean that everybody else needs to. But what does become a problem is when people start spouting off untrue things and confusing people. That becomes a problem. Mm-hmm. And I don't like that because I feel like it leads people down a really small path. You know, it's like when I was at that farmer's market, people were buying peppers from me. And I would tell them, like, look, the weather forecast looks a little iffy. Wait 3 days, check your 10-day forecast, and then plant. Mm-hmm. You know, just it'll be fine in the pot. Keep it watered. Keep it outside. Just make sure that it's not going to get cold. Yeah. And, you know, once you do that, I think, you know, that's the responsible thing to do. Mm-hmm. What's a couple days going to do? Yeah. I mean, really, are you going to get that much of a jump on a couple days? Yeah. You know, probably a couple weeks, yes. But a couple days, no. It doesn't matter at all.
Agreed.
Firm stance. So, everybody, I believe that we've covered that zones don't matter anymore. Batavia is officially in Zone 6A, and I am in Zone 8A. Officially.
You've heard my singing voice, and you all can form your opinions on it.
That's right. And you can come check us out on Facebook at Backyard Gardens Community Garden and support us on Patreon or Apple subscriptions. And just remember, we have actively learned to grow and growed for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya.
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
All purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck.
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.